Gold has become a hot commodity in the last year. The U.S. stands at #1 for owning the most gold, and Russia has been in the top 5 stockpiling gold for years. But in the first quarter of 2019, the World Gold Council reported Russia hit a 6-year high in its gold purchases. Now, this is the largest increase for this period since 2013. This comes as the Russian government has increased its efforts to drift away from American assets, including the U.S. dollar. Director of Research at William Vault told the UK's Daily Express Russia's heavy gold buying is a bad sign for world peace. Heavy gold buying by governments or central banks is rarely a good sign for world peace and cooperation. Joining me now is CEO of Euro-Pacific Capital, Peter Schiff. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Sure, my pleasure.
I want to start by asking you this. Is it normal for other countries to get nervous when one country increases their gold purchases, or is this mainly because it's coming from Russia?
Well, I don't think it has to do with the Russians preparing for any type of actual war. I think what Russia is doing and what other central banks are recognizing is that they need to increase their gold reserves because of an impending dollar crisis. Ever since the U.S. led the world off the gold standard, the world has been on a dollar standard. Now, that was fine when the dollar was backed by gold, but now the dollar's backed by nothing. And so if you're backing your currency with a currency that's backed by nothing, well, then your currency is backed by nothing. And up until now, that hasn't been a problem because people have still perceived value in the dollar. But I think that's going to change. I think the next recession, when the Fed goes back to zero and when we launch QE4, I think the dollar's role as a reserve currency is going to be questioned, and central banks need an alternative. And the only viable alternative to back up their own currency is real money, which is gold.
Well, and that's the interesting part where you say, well, these countries are looking to buy gold for sort of more independence and to get away from the dollar and kind of protect themselves against U.S. sanctions, for example, China, Russia. Is this why the U.S. has the biggest gold reserve?
Well, the U.S. has the biggest gold reserves because we had all the gold at one point. And, while other countries back their currency with dollars, we can't back our currency with dollars, so we have to back it by something. And so it's been backed by gold. But the problem is we don't have enough gold relative to all the currency that we've been creating and relative to all the currency we're going to be creating when the Fed starts monetizing massive deficits that we're going to have during the next recession. But your point about the sanctions is well taken. I mean, the fact that the United States uses the dollar as a weapon and the reserve status of the dollar, other countries don't like this. And so to the extent that they can move away from the dollar, well, then they kill two birds with one stone. And one way of doing that is to increase their gold reserves now while gold is still cheap. Because when the dollar really starts to tank, the price of gold is going to soar. So Russia right now obviously wants to buy as much gold as it can while the price is still relatively cheap. That allows it to build up a bigger hoard of gold to replace the diminished value that the dollar is going to play as a reserve currency.
And we've already seen the cost of gold go up a little bit as it's become a hotter commodity. Do the U.S. or Western Europe have really any leverage to stop countries like Russia or China from buying gold?
Not really. I mean, I don't see how we can stop them from buying gold. In fact, everything we're doing is pushing them in that direction. In fact, that's what we're doing now with China, with this trade war. And, one of the ways that the Chinese win the trade war is to decrease their exports to the U.S. and consume more of their production domestically. And, they're moving in that direction now, but a strengthening Chinese yuan would help remarkably. And one way to strengthen yuan would be to sell dollars and sell U.S. treasuries and then buy gold. And then so the Chinese would be replacing their treasuries with gold. That would help increase the value of the yuan, and that would help increase the purchasing power of their own citizens, while really dealing a fatal blow to the dollar and the U.S. economy at the same time.
Is it even possible, do you think, for countries to actually ditch the U.S. dollar? What leverage does the U.S. have if countries did this?
Well, it's not only possible, it's inevitable. And ultimately, the U.S. won't have any leverage at all. Now, some people think, well, we have the military, we have, all these missiles and all these planes and carriers. And the question is, would the U.S. actually try to blackmail the world into continuing this relationship? I don't think we're that evil. I don't think that that's going to happen. Ultimately, I mean, this was an exorbitant privilege that the United States has enjoyed for decades, but it has abused that privilege dramatically, even more so recently, with the sanctions. So I think that privilege is going to be lost, and with it will go the artificially high standard of living that came along with it in the United States.
Well, the price of gold is definitely invaluable for all countries. We'll see if Russia continues or what country buys the most gold in quarter two. Thank you so much for your time, Peter Schiff.
Sure thing.